This was a brutal attack on Katrina Smith.
A senseless murder of a bright young woman.
The individual who attacked her was going to make sure that she did not survive.
As the investigation expands, the mystery deepens.
She felt that she was being followed or stalked by somebody.
Katrina knew that her life was in danger.
The truth will be revealed.
How did he know about blood in the trunk?
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Machesney Park, Illinois, a quiet enclave.
It's a smaller community. It's more quaint.
It's very close-knit. You can leave your doors open, and there's not a lot of crime.
You have your vehicle burglaries, you have, your home burglaries that happen, crimes of opportunity, crimes of violence in Machesney Park. That doesn't happen every day. That's not Chicago. It's more relaxed. It's a safer city.
But on the afternoon of October 23rd, that peaceful tranquility is brutally shattered.
Concerned because I haven't been here.
Okay.
We had a frantic, distraught, worried husband, Todd Smith. He reports that his wife has disappeared.
You haven't been able to reach your wife?
Right.
What's your wife's name?
Katrina.
He had seen her the night before. And now all of a sudden, he's very concerned because she hasn't contacted him. She hasn't answered the phone. And he doesn't know what's happened to her.
The missing woman is 30-year-old Katrina Smith.
From the information we gathered about...
Katrina works in human resources at a local automotive plant.
She was at work every day at 8 o'clock at Cameron Industries. Excellent employee, always had a smile on her face, always cheery. She attended church in Rockford quite regularly. She was very devoted to her family.
Tasked with investigating the disappearance of Katrina Smith are veteran detective Vince Lindbergh and Criminal Bureau Chief Prosecutor Marilyn Height Ross.
The State Attorney's Office is involved very early on in any crime investing, and we were involved immediately.
Investigators meet with Katrina's husband, Todd Smith, to gather more information about her disappearance.
The night before, which would have been October 22nd, Katrina had confirmed a job interview for the morning of October 23rd at 7:30, and then she was to report to work after that.
Before 7 a.m., Todd had texted Katrina, wishing her well on her job interview. You'll do well, knock it out of the park.
But she never appeared for the job interview.
He had attempted to call her, attempted to contact her. She had vanished, she had disappeared.
Investigators get their first big break when Katrina's car is spotted, only a few miles from her house.
The car was recovered right about 7:50 that night, roughly 2 hours after Todd had made the report. It was on Ventura, which is about 3 to 4 miles away from the family house.
It was parked near the edge of the river, and it was just abandoned.
This is not a habitual place for anyone to leave their car. So this in itself is...
We suspect that the vehicle would have been moved from the Winnebago County area, and it had not been moved. So we were suspicious then that she was probably not alive.
I mean, this is a girl who is, by every definition, just a fantastic, solid family woman who has a solid job, a career that she's looking to improve. So what we're thinking now is something suspicious, something foul had happened to Katrina.
To solve the mystery, investigators will need to piece together the last 24
where it fits to make a story, to make a case. So timeline is everything.
But with no sign of Katrina, detectives have their work cut out for them.
There's forensic evidence that you can obtain from your victim, which will narrow your timeline. Without a crime scene, we just don't know. We're still kind of shooting in the dark here.
The community of McChesney Park bands together to help find Katrina Smith.
Hundreds of people literally come out from the community searching everywhere. They were instructed to have our crime scene officers come out and gather up that evidence.
After hours of searching, authorities find some unsettling items on the side of the road.
We located her cellular phone, which was found in a bush that was not far from the marital home in the area of the Rock River. We also located her purse, which was found in that same area a short distance away.
This is not consistent with someone who just took the day off work and is playing hooky, or someone who has decided to go missing or make themselves disappear.
What I'm thinking is that someone has probably killed Katrina. And I don't think at this point it's someone who was a total stranger, because they left all of her valuables. They didn't take her car, they didn't take her purse.
The first person investigators want to interview is Katrina's husband, Todd.
Todd was distraught. He was so concerned about her. He loved her. They had just taken an anniversary trip and celebrated their 7-year marriage.
The person that has the most emotional investment into the victim, whether it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband or wife, that's always the person that seems to be the most connected.
Todd is cooperative and willing to answer any questions that come his way.
I'm asking him, does she have a gambling problem? Todd tells me no. She wouldn't do that. Does she have a drug problem? Nope, that's out of the question. Does she have a problem with having a relationship outside the family, outside of him? Absolutely not. They both supposedly have any problems. Todd explained that to us, that their marriage was excellent.
But Katrina has been staying at a friend's condominium, which raises questions for detectives.
Why is she staying somewhere else and you're staying at the family home?
He indicated that there were no issues in the marriage. Katrina was house sitting for her friend at the condominium, and that everything was fine.
Detectives questioned Todd about the last time he saw Katrina.
He tells us that Katrina had arrived home at about 6 p.m. He said that she arrived at the home to do concerned about her appearance for the interview, so she wanted to go out and grab a new outfit. So she left the home at 9 o'clock p.m. to do some shopping for her job interview.
That night, Katrina was planning to sleep at the condo and was hoping to catch the end of the Chicago football game.
She was a Bears fan. She didn't want to miss the game. And so she wanted to get back to her friend's condo. He had sent her a message at about 11 p.m. that night saying sweet dreams, and expected to hear back from her. He didn't, so he figured she was probably in bed asleep because she was very
looking for clues about what may have happened to Katrina.
There was no sign that Katrina had slept there the night before or had been there at all. We now know that she never made it back to the condominium. And so the question is, what has happened in between that time period?
Detectives have now determined Katrina was likely killed between 7:30 a.m. and 9 p.m. the night before, on October 22nd. Armed with this information, they questioned Todd about his whereabouts during this time period.
After Katrina left the family home that night, Todd had told us that Todd's cell phone, that he did text Katrina at about 11 p.m. that night or shortly after 11 p.m. and said, sweet dreams, good night. The next day, Todd had appointments to go out on, but during the morning, he worked from home and he did some emails.
Basically, the computer that he would have been working from home on confirmed that he was at home.
With Todd's alibi checking out, detectives now shift their focus to other potential suspects.
We're looking for any speck of information that can give us a lead that may be able to help us determine what is. Someone was peeping at their home. It was determined that it was a young man from the neighborhood area.
Peeping Toms for years were dismissed as sort of a nuisance crime. We now know better. Peeping Toms are actually a very high-risk category of voyeur. These behaviors often escalate to actual attacks.
This could have been a person lurking around the home to potentially attack her once she had left the home.
In the investigation, we find out the young man's actually connected to Katrina and Todd through a church for. We want to look into that. That's a potential lead. I mean, if he's peeping 2 years ago, has his behavior progressed to murder?
Working a theory that a peeping Tom who targeted Katrina Smith 2 years prior might have turned violent, detectives hunt him down.
We go back through all the reports of anything that has happened in that neighborhood that's suspicious. And there was a second report of a peeper in that same neighborhood.
Detectives canvass the neighborhood for information about a potential stalker when they notice a video surveillance camera at a neighbor's home.
We asked the owner for the video, and that video was not a great video. It's dark outside, it's raining heavily, but in that video, it discloses a figure crossing his yard on the 22nd, late at night while it's raining.
The person appeared to be walking in the direction of Katrina and Todd's home at approximately 11:30 p.m. Is that it appeared to be a male. It appeared to be someone of small stature.
Then this figure goes across his yard and into a field. Now, who's gonna be out in a rainstorm like that, cutting through a field? It's just something that really raises red flags.
Identifying this person could be the break detectives need to unravel the mystery of Katrina's disappearance.
Is this the young man that was peeping 2 years ago? We need to look at him and find out, is there any potential of him being a valid suspect and open up the whole case?
Detectives track down the peeping Tom, who's now living several hours away.
This individual was in fact in college and was on the college campus at the time that Katrina went missing.
He tells detectives he never left campus that night. They check the school's security logs and video, which confirm the young man's story.
Law enforcement was able to substantiate that he was nowhere near Katrina the night she went missing, nor the marital home.
With the peeping Tom theory proving to be Katrina Smith's final steps on the day she disappeared.
Katrina Smith worked as an HR representative. She had worked in that field for approximately 4 to 5 years. She was very well liked by her co-workers and her supervisors. Christina, her supervisor, had last seen her on October 22nd, that Monday, at approximately 5 p.m., when Katrina had left work.
Talking with Katrina's supervisor, detectives learn about an alarming incident that recently took place at Katrina's office.
Christina tells us it was during a lunch hour at camera 300 or so flyers.
The flyer was very derogatory, and it was disparaging the character of Katrina Smith.
Why would anybody disseminate flyers through a parking lot of a business ridiculing and demeaning Katrina? So this is very disturbing.
This is someone whose anger justifies and rationalizes what they do next. It could be distributing flyers one day, posting things on social media one day. It could be something much worse another day.
Initially went missing. We were able to recover the video.
The driver of that vehicle, he or she, was disguised with a wig, glasses, and unfortunately, the vehicle, although it was black, we had no license plate because the license plates were not on the vehicle.
From the video, it's impossible to identify the car or the driver, but detectives have gained a shocking new detail about Katrina's personal life.
The flyer also indicated that she was having an affair with someone and was cheating on her husband.
So now we have a flyer that's being disseminated by with somebody at work named Guy.
Guy Gabriel is a recently divorced co-worker who has been seen spending time with Katrina.
We're getting this information from Christina at work that there is rumors that Guy Gabriel and Katrina are having a relationship.
Katrina had eventually started to confide in Christina that there were marital issues and that the marriage was not going well.
This was something that was never mentioned by Todd Smith in the initial interview. And as a matter of fact, in his statements, he swore that they had gone through some relationship problems in the past and that they would never seek comfort outside the home.
Detectives learn more about Katrina's relationship with Guy Gabriel.
When our crime scene officers ended up diving into Katrina's phone, we confirmed that Guy Gabriel and Katrina were having a romantic relationship. They went out a couple times for lunch a few times and talked, and she shared problems with Guy. But then eventually that relationship became closer. It had been about Katrina divorcing Todd Smith.
Investigators bring Guy Gabriel into the station for questioning.
He was irritated a bit that we wanted a formal interview.
They ask him to recount the last time he saw Katrina.
Sunday night, which was the 21st, Guy Gabriel and Katrina had stayed together at Kelly's condo. On Monday morning, Guy Gabriel gets up. This is the morning of the 22nd, and he sees her off to work.
The next time Guy communicates with Katrina,
Communication that we believe Katrina made to Guy Gabriel was at approximately 7:30 p.m. when she indicated she wanted to be at the condominium for Monday Night Football.
Katrina may have only texted Guy once that night, but he was texting her nonstop.
The night of October 22nd, he's on edge, waiting to hear from Katrina on whether or not she was going to disclose to Todd that she wanted a divorce. That night, their text messages indicate that Guy was very concerned about that the relationship's over with. Now that does send up red flags, because now you have somebody who is having a relationship with Katrina that appears to be very obsessed with her leaving her husband.
This can very quickly escalate to become a very dangerous, volatile situation. You introduce jealousy, you introduce resentment. And those can be powerful motivators for someone who lacks basic impulse control and who needs to be in control.
We don't know that she's ready at that point for sure to tell Todd that she wants things done with. Maybe between the hours of 9 o'clock and the following morning. At this point, we don't know exactly where he's texting her from. Is he texting her from around the corner? Is he watching the house? Is it possible that after she leaves the home, as Todd says, to go back and shop, that her and Guy Gabriel meet up? He is our primary focus. He is our primary suspect. Could this be the guy? We have to investigate him.
Detectives are zeroing in Guy Gabriel.
So, did Guy Gabriel have any contact with her that night, either near the home, or did they meet up later that night, and then things went awry from there? That is a possibility.
They look into Guy's movements in the critical window during which Katrina went missing.
Guy Gabriel indicated that Sunday night he had stayed at the condominium with Katrina Smith. Katrina went to work that morning, and then that evening he left to go to work because he worked the graveyard shift.
Guy's shift began at 8 p.m. on October.
There's always an opportunity to leave work, right? So we went to Cameron Industries.
Detectives checked video surveillance and the security logs at Guy Gabriel's workplace. They show that he was in the building the whole night.
We were able to pull all of the video footage of him being in and out, supervising other individuals who had interacted with him.
If Guy Gabriel would have left Cameron Industries that evening during work, we would have seen it on that video. So we were able to eliminate Guy Gabriel.
With Guy Gabriel now in the clear, the investigation hits a roadblock.
It's frustrating. I try to take about Katrina, and once you learn about Katrina and what a wonderful person she was and what a wonderful family she has, you want to do the best job you can for them. You want to solve this case, and you want to do it right.
Investigators turn to her family for more information regarding Katrina's final movements.
Bruce was Katrina's stepfather. He basically raised Katrina with her mom, Vicky.
He was with us. He was so concerned about her.
Detectives ask Bruce if he knows of anyone who would want to harm Katrina.
He tells us that Katrina was so concerned that she has a conversation with a Verizon employee talking about, is there any way somebody could bug or clone her phone because she feels like somebody's keeping track of her and following her. And then all of a sudden on the 19th, he gets this text from her asking about getting a gun for protection. So, you know, the alarm bells are going off with him.
Talk of getting a gun just days before she goes missing suggests Katrina was looking to defend herself.
It is apparent that Katrina was in fear of something and that she
knew that her life was in danger and in jeopardy.
As detectives work to uncover the identity of who could be stalking Katrina, they take note of something unusual.
Every day, people are searching for Katrina. They're searching for evidence. Todd is at the search party scenes, but does not appear to be engaged. Todd is conducting interviews with the local media. There's crying with no tears.
It's been horrible. I just wanted to cry.
Crocodile tears, his sadness and everything.
You know, there's emotion without emotion. And we are seeing this play out before the cameras.
For good investigators, gut instincts are honed. This is where investigators need to pay particular attention to the nuances, the micro expressions, as we call them, of potential persons of interest.
I am a detective that watches behavior. Todd's behavior was very inconsistent with somebody that was...
Based on his suspicious behavior, detectives take another look at Todd, now as a potential suspect.
Todd had told us the marriage was excellent. He maintained the whole time that they weren't going to get divorced.
But when detectives talk to Katrina's friends, they get a different story.
October 13th, she went out for a girls' night with her girlfriends. During that night, she told one of her girlfriends, Jill, that she was not happy in the marriage, and she had brought up the word divorce several times in the conversation. The night of the 22nd, Jill's husband made a phone call to Todd. Todd told him that, and Jill's husband said, well, that sounds good. Maybe that's good. Todd says, no, I think it's done. I think she's done with me.
This new information reveals that Todd hasn't been truthful with police from the very beginning.
The whole time, Todd is telling us the marriage is great, no problems in the marriage, and everything's going well. But Katrina is relaying to her friends, her co-workers, that her marriage isn't good. So the statements that Todd gave us, we're able to pick apart several of those statements as untruths.
As detectives, what the tests reveal shakes them to their core.
It was pretty much neon lights when the luminol was sprayed into the trunk of the vehicle. We were able to see the outline of a body that had been placed in the trunk of her vehicle.
How do you explain blood in a trunk? It was apparent that someone had been placed in that trunk. We believe that blood was Katrina's.
Revealing that this may be more than just a missing persons case.
Katrina had bled out significantly. There was even blood on the bumper of the vehicle, so we know that when she was placed in the vehicle, she was most likely substantially incapacitated.
Sometimes you have some, even without a body, evidence of a crime. You have some blood spatter. You have what's called exsanguination, which is blood volume, which in terms of no-body homicides is as close to a smoking gun as you can get.
Now we know we have a crime scene at the car to hide, eliminate the body.
With suspicion now building around Katrina's husband, Todd, investigators dig into his background.
We know that Todd Smith had a business where he was a financial advisor, and this was his own business. It was not as productive and successful as he had portrayed it to be. He was facing a fraud lawsuit in federal court. Katrina was actually the breadwinner in the family. She was the one that paid for the mortgage on the home, that paid.
So clear.
We also learned that Todd was very possessive and jealous of Katrina, and the fact that she might now want to move on and get a divorce was very disturbing to Todd.
As detectives look deeper into Todd's past, they learn something even more alarming.
In the investigation, I ended up speaking with a family member of Todd Smith's, and his name was Justin. Justin was a half-brother to Todd. The story was that at 17 years old, Todd ended up disconnecting a gas line from the stove and ended up blowing.
At the time, Todd was sentenced to 30 months probation, and he became permanently estranged from his family.
It paints a picture of someone who appears to be a meek and mild individual, but underneath there's a seething pot of anger and jealousy that erupts in a violent manner that could end in someone's death.
When we learn more about Todd's past, that he's this troubled violent, fire-starting teenager, this Jekyll and Hyde character emerged that then casts, I think,
For Todd's criminal past, they get a phone call that turns the case on its head.
Todd is upset. Todd is very upset. And he discusses how upset he is about Katrina's blood being found in the trunk of the vehicle.
For detectives, this is a red flag. No one in the sheriff's department has released the information about Katrina's blood being found in the car.
He tells us one of Katrina's family members told him about it. So we're talking to the family members. None of them knew anything about it. So how did Todd know about blood in the trunk?
To the public, it had not been disclosed to the family members.
Now believing Todd likely murdered Katrina, investigators search for physical evidence to tie him to the crime.
We searched the computers and we were able to find remnants of this disparaging flyer that had been distributed at Katrina's workplace before she went missing.
Now, how does that flyer, outlining a relationship, very rudely might I ask, between Guy and Katrina, how does that flyer end up on his computer? Did Katrina put it there? Him?
The individual distributing the flyers in disguise, in fact, ended up being Todd.
Todd did everything he could to try to erase everything, but he doesn't realize that a computer keeps secrets, even when you try to delete them.
Todd passing out these types of flyers and trying to degrade, humiliate Katrina is horrible enough in itself. This, in my mind, has violent motivation as well.
When investigators comb through Todd's computer,
A tracking software, which coincides with a small box that one of our detectives located and right away identified it as some kind of housing for a tracker.
before she disappeared, Katrina believed she was being followed, and she was right. Todd had been tracking her every move.
That tracking software that was on the computer was forensically analyzed by one of our detectives. He was able to show that the night Katrina disappeared, the night of October, seen following a path through the woods, which coincides with the resident who has the videotape of that figure going across that gentleman's front yard. It then concludes its tracking just a very short distance from the Smith home.
What we believe Todd did was after he had dumped her car, he removed the tracking device, but he thought it was off and it was not.
Whole huge corner of that puzzle.
Katrina Smith's husband, Todd, has become the prime suspect in her disappearance and presumed murder. Detectives bring him in for questioning and confront him about what they've discovered.
I confront him with the flyers. I confront him with the marriage. I confront him with the track stick. I confront him with everything. His response was to ignore those confrontations. He didn't say a word. He didn't respond to my accusations. If you were being accused of murder and didn't do it, he said, didn't do it? I want a lawyer. And then he pointed up at the camera and said, I want a lawyer. And he was screaming. He was so upset.
Detectives have enough evidence to tie Todd Smith to his wife's murder, but they still don't arrest him.
They have nearly all the circumstantial evidence they need, but they hold out and stay focused, looking for that final piece to close the circle. Good evidence often can mean the difference between making an arrest and someone being acquitted at trial and making an arrest and making sure that person never gets out.
Then a November they've been waiting for.
An off-duty firefighter noticed what appeared to be something in the water that shouldn't be there.
Unfortunately, through that investigation and through that autopsy, we were able to determine it was Katrina Smith.
Individuals always think that when they toss a body in the river that they get rid of evidence, but they really do not. I knew eventually Katrina would surface and her body would be able to tell me how she died and how she spent the last minutes of her life.
Declares the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head.
She was probably most likely struck from behind, and defensive wounds on her forearms would have indicated an attempt to protect herself.
The type of weapon that would cause those types of injuries is some kind of cylindrical object.
We were able to determine from the evidence that that cylindrical object was more than likely a pipe or a bat.
This was a brutal attack on Katrina Smith. The attack showed that the individual who wanted to make sure that she did not survive the attack.
Detectives searched the Smith home, looking for the murder weapon.
The bat was found during the execution of one of the search warrants in the garage in a corner. The testing of the bat showed that there was presence of human blood in different areas of the bat. It ended up being Katrina's blood.
Luminol is sprayed throughout the garage where the murder weapon was found.
Crime scene saw what they believed was evidence that the place that she was killed was in the garage.
They finally have the physical evidence proving Todd killed his wife.
We believe that Todd took his marriage vows literally, till death do us part. And his motive in killing Katrina was to maintain her as his wife forever.
Investigators are now able to complete the picture of what they believe happened to Katrina Smith in the final 24 hours of her life.
October 20, approximately 5:30 p.m.
She got to the family residence at about 6 p.m. where she started her laundry for her job interview the following morning at 7:30.
That night, Katrina tells Todd she wants a divorce.
Todd is pressuring her to stay in the marriage and not to seek a divorce.
Investigators determined that Guy Gabriel was trying to help Katrina.
We believe that she is looking for someone to support her in her decision to end the marriage. Guy is providing her that support through their text messages.
And go back to the condo. Todd was very upset.
We believe that when she is leaving the home, Todd struck Katrina to the back of the head with a bat. She then attempts to protect her head by putting up her arms, which shows linear marks that fit the shape of the bat, as he continued to beat her repeatedly. He then dragged that car where she died. We believe that Todd drove Katrina's body to the bridge shortly after 11. He dumped Katrina's body into the river.
He then proceeded to drive the car to Ventura and Obispo, where he ditched the car. Then at 11:24, we have a text from Todd to Katrina's phone that says, "Sweet dreams, good night."
The last text message he sent to her was a signal of, you know what, you will forever be my wife. You will die my wife.
On November 21st, 2012, Todd Smith is charged with first-degree murder.
The timeline basically put this case together and tied it in a bow. It was rock solid. We were able to pinpoint his movements. We were able to pinpoint Katrina's movements, and when she went off the grid, we knew that in order for her to be off the grid, she was most likely dead.
In January 2017, 4 years after Katrina's murder,
The murder of Katrina Smith was just a brutal, heinous crime. She was a beautiful young woman who wanted to live her life. She just wanted to live it without Todd. And instead of allowing her to do that, he decided to take her life. Todd believed that he could commit the perfect murder, and I think his downfall was the arrogance that he could get away with it.
She wasn't wrong. Her instincts were right there. She was being stalked. She just didn't know by whom. It was her own husband stalking her.
he is sentenced to 59 years in prison.
I think about her all the time. I have pictures of her during her beautiful life that her family has shared with me, and I keep those pictures close at hand as a reminder of why we do what we do, more importantly, why I do what I do.
With every police officer, with every detective, with everybody in law enforcement, there are those cases that attach themselves to your soul, to your heart. Katrina and her family, they have permanently attached themselves to my heart.
Brutal way that she suffered. Why somebody would want to do this to somebody else is beyond my comprehension.
The murder of a sable-eyed beauty in the prime of her life.
She was wrapped in tape, and she had had a sock shoved down her throat.
This is against every woman's instinct to leave your friend behind.
A mystery that sparks a media firestorm and a plea for justice.
He handcuffed her and threw her.
He's on parole, and he knows that we're looking at him.
He was not a truth teller. Well, is that because he's somehow involved in this homicide?
The truth will be revealed.
At least now we can say for sure, his DNA is not supposed to be there. I mean, I wasn't physically jumping up and down, but inside I was.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The killer. New York City, where people come to chase their dreams and find success. Not far from the bright lights of Manhattan is the Belt Parkway in South Brooklyn and the notorious area of Fountain and Seaview.
Fountain Avenue is in one of the grittier areas of South Brooklyn. The Belt Parkway runs along one side of it. There's a creek that runs along the other side.
It's desolate. It's a dead end because no one's going to bother you there.
It's been a known mob dumping ground. There's no reason to go there unless you're going fishing or dumping a body.
On Saturday, February 25th, 2006, a 911 call comes in at 8:26 p.m.
Police always emergency. Oh, yes, I found a DOA. It looks like a DOA on Seaview Avenue in Fountain. That's in Brooklyn, right? Yes, and I seen him wrapped up in a sheet. It was a male. Do you see? I don't see. I didn't see. It was a body. It looked like a body wrapped.
We get this anonymous call that a guy saw what he believed was a body being dropped out of the back of a vehicle. And then he hung up.
Homicide detectives John Cornicello and Sean McTighe of Brooklyn's legendary 75th Precinct, also known as the 7-5, respond to the call.
We had found a girl. She had tape all over her face. She was wrapped up in a blanket on Fountain Avenue on the side of the road. Initially, we thought it was a local prostitute there.
We weren't sure if it was a sex crime, but she's wrapped up in this blanket, and you want to keep it intact as much as possible before it goes to the medical examiner's office.
Brutal way that she suffered. Why somebody would want to do this to somebody else is beyond my comprehension.
Detectives immediately start to process the scene, looking for any clues that could help with the investigation.
We did our initial canvass in the area, obviously looked for evidence around the body. Oh, it could be important evidence.
There's no wallet, there's no ID, nothing to kind of help us to zero in on who she is.
The detective's only lead at this point is the anonymous 911 call, made a couple of miles from where the body was dropped.
The call came from a payphone by a diner on Linden Boulevard. Can we identify the caller? We spoke to the people in the diner, and we didn't get any results there. And it's a public payphone. Fingerprints.
With their initial canvass netting little to identify who the victim is and what happened to her, detectives are faced with another challenge.
She was preserved, for lack of a better word, because it was freezing in February. So that puts a hamper on pinpointing, at this point in the investigation, the time of death, to find out exactly where she was and how she died.
When you don't know where someone has been in the last 24 hours, and you have someone who is found in the way that she was found, it's New York City. She could have come in contact with anyone.
With so many unanswered questions, the detectives know that the road to the killer runs through identifying their Jane Doe.
We have to start by finding out who she is. And we really had a clean slate, unfortunately, to go on.
She was found in a desolate area. There were no cameras near where she was found. There wasn't a lot of people to be interviewed. There wasn't a big area to canvass. So we're hoping that the medical examiner will find any little thing in the investigation that's going to help us identify her. Because I can't find out who killed you unless I know who you are.
At 8:26 p.m. at Fountain and Seaview. They're counting on the autopsy to reveal more about how and when she died.
Her wrists were bound from behind with plastic zip ties. Inside the blanket, she was wrapped in tape, and below the tape, she had a sock stuffed into her mouth and shoved down her throat. So ultimately, she died of asphyxia, the inability to get air to the lungs and blood to the brain. And it became clear from the autopsy and the internal examination that...
distinctive tan lines, like boy shorts tan lines, as opposed to a bikini. And it's February. So this person obviously was just at a beach somewhere.
Her fingernails were also cut very short, and a chunk of her hair was hacked off.
And the way the fingernails and the hair were cut, that's not normal.
Why would someone cut off a woman's hair? Makes me think that this person is very careful. They're very planful. They know what they're doing, and they don't want DNA evidence.
Within 12 to 24 hours of when we found her.
Detectives must now piece together Jane Doe's last 24 hours to find her killer, starting with identifying who she is.
The Daily News put out online rather quickly the fact that the police had provided to them, that a body has been found and appears to be homicidal in such a location and such a time.
Sometimes the police and the media have a very cooperative relationship. We can help, asking for help from the media to get the word out about it so they might be able to identify who this person was. And that message goes out to millions of people very quickly.
The morning after Jane Doe's discovery, a young woman, Alejandra St. Guillen, comes into the 75th precinct. She's seen the news bulletin and has information. Her sister is missing.
We bring her in the interview room. I ask her, why do you feel that this person is the person you think it is? She says her sister just got back from vacation friends the night before. So that's important because of the tan lines. But we just want to make sure. And I had a Polaroid picture now from the autopsy. And I showed her the picture and she was obviously distraught. Just in total disbelief, shock, hysterical crying. So without even saying a word, I knew it was her relative.
Detectives are finally able to identify the victim of this grisly homicide.
Boston area. She'd gone to a private school, Boston Latin. She was raised by her mother after her father died when she was 9 years old. Emmett was following in her father's footsteps. He had studied criminal justice, and she was a criminal justice student at John Jay College. Emmett was a brilliant young woman, honor roll. She could have gone and done anything.
So now I have her name, I get her family members' names, I get her friends' names, and then we decide who we're gonna go to first.
The night before Emmett's body was found, she was out celebrating her upcoming 25th birthday.
And went over the course of events of that night. So this particular night, they went to the Pioneer Bar in Manhattan.
In the old days, the Bowery was drunks and bums, and if you stopped your car, they would, try to clean your windshield with dirty rags, and you just wanted to get away from it. But, but now, in 2006, this is an up-and-coming area. So they were just going out to have a nice social night in a nice area of Manhattan.
I remember Claire telling us that it was between 3 and Matt wants to still stay out. So they leave the Pioneer Bar and they're having an argument outside of the bar. It wasn't normal for her to keep partying like this and not wanting to go home and not wanting to be with her friends.
Claire had tried to get her in a cab a couple times and was unsuccessful. And she threw up her hands and said, "You want to stay out? Stay out. I'm going home." And did.
Claire gets in a cab, she leaves. Emmett now walks the opposite direction of the bar. That's 3:30. Claire now feels probably 3:45. Where are you? I'm gonna come get you. I'm gonna bring you home. But Emmett doesn't know what bar she's at. She said, "I've got a drink. Once I finish my drink, I'm leaving."
Claire's worried about her, but, eventually Emmett convinces her that everything's going to be okay. I mean, this is against every woman's instinct to leave your friend behind.
And that's the last time she ever spoke to her.
Detectives have determined the last time anyone in a bar alone and had just left her best friend Claire, but they don't know which bar.
I need to know, where did she go when she left Claire? When Claire pulls away in that cab, did she go north, south, east, west? Did she have a fight with anybody? Did somebody give Annette a ride home? A million questions, because we have to find out what happened to this girl.
I have kids, I have girls, and I remember going home and saying, here's the deal. Don't ever forget this. You go out with somebody, you leave with them. You don't leave your friends behind. You have to learn.
I've been out to bars, my girlfriends have been out to bars where, you know, someone decides to leave early, you end up being there alone. Maybe you want to have one more drink. And this case really hammers home how vulnerable young women who are alone in bars after they've been drinking can be.
So a friend doesn't know where she is. A friend knows that she has a credit card. So we start getting records on her credit card usage. Where was her credit card used?
She bought 2 rum and cokes at the Falls Bar. Now, she bought those 2 drinks with cash. It would have hurt our investigation tremendously.
What strikes me about this case, what really resonates, is the little breadcrumbs we leave behind in our lives. You have to ask yourself, had she not bought those 2 rum and cokes with a credit card and left some kind of trail behind, what other evidence do we have that she's even at the bar? So something as everyday, as seemingly benign as using a credit card ends up being so critical in this case.
The Falls Bar is only 2 blocks away from the Pioneer. So when you come out of the Pioneer, you make a right and a right. The Falls Bar is the last place we know she was.
We have a starting point. Now we can narrow down. 3:45 a.m. she's there.
Detectives are now working with a 16-hour window between 3:45 a.m., when Annette paid for her drinks, and 8:26 p.m., when her body was found in South Brooklyn.
So we're in Manhattan. My expectation is we're going to have video all over the place. You know, this is Manhattan. It's not Brooklyn. So we task a team with finding video. Maybe we can pick her up somewhere. Anything else?
Annette entering the Falls Bar at 3:40 a.m. But there is no footage of her leaving the bar when it closes at 4 a.m. or any time thereafter.
Now we know where she was alive and well at around closing time on that Saturday morning. So now you have to look at the universe of characters who were in that place who might have something to say about this.
How many people did she come into contact with that night? In narrowing down that list of persons of interest to potential suspects, you would always start with the staff who keep an eye on things, and those are the bartenders and the bouncers.
Detectives believe someone at the Falls Bar could be a witness, or even Emmette's killer. The bartender remembers serving Emmette that evening.
She's the one that actually sold the 2 drinks to Emmette. She remembered Emmette being intoxicated and it being the end of the night and being obligated to close the bar, and that there was talk of her having to leave.
The bartender tells detectives at 4 a.m., bar manager Daniel Dorian wanted Emmette out.
Dorian wanting to get her out of the place because, and I don't know the exact words, but she had been drinking and, you know, she's crazy. We got to get her out of here.
Now it's time to go. She's like, I paid for my drinks. I'm not going anywhere. Dorian gets fed up. Maybe he doesn't want to deal with it. Maybe he's drinking. He tells the 2 bouncers, get her out of here.
Daniel Dorian's name is well known to police. His family owns a number of bars across the 5 boroughs.
Dorian was a piece of work in the bar.
He said, well, I was working, counting the money for the night, proceeds. So I don't know what you're talking about.
So on one hand, you have Dorian's statement, and then you have the barmaid who paints a whole different picture. So now, again, that's like, ooh, you know, why is he being evasive?
He was not a truth teller. And one has to ask oneself, well, is that because he's somehow involved in this homicide?
You know, you go back to a hunch, anything, you didn't see anything. Something just wasn't right.
Their suspicions raised by how Daniel Dorian's story contradicts the bartender's. Detectives questioned Dorian about his whereabouts after the bar closed at 4 a.m.
He says he's in an office in an isolated area. He's providing an opportunity where he's by himself, and then he's got this wide time frame of, well, I don't know when she left, I don't know when they left, and then I was there for maybe another hour.
The bar's already closed.
Under the circumstances, it's just too many things that have to be answered, you know, that leave a question in your mind as an investigator. It raises him to, you know, to a pretty high level. Did he try to pick her up, and then did something go bad, and now is he off her?
Detectives have zeroed in on bar manager Daniel Dorian as their first suspect in the brutal murder of 24-year-old criminal justice student Imette St. Guillen.
But he's just saying, I don't know who this girl is. Obviously, there's something more to that.
The Falls was connected to the Dorian family, a notorious family in New York for several reasons. The patriarch, Red Dorian, was known as a bootlegger back in the 20s. The family opened a bar on the Upper East Side called Dorian's Red Hand after the patriarch. It was known as a place where prep school kids could go and get drunk and hook up with each other. That bar became notorious in the mid-'80s. It was a black eye for the family.
In this case, we see Dorian lying initially about his alibi. This is not that uncommon in that people lie in murder investigations all the time, and they think they're white lies, and in reality, they can really derail an investigation. At the same time, it's uncanny that this is the second high-profile murder linked to a series of bars and nightclubs owned by the same family. It's like lightning striking twice in the same place.
So now we start to say, well, wait a minute. His father had this bar, this bad press on this restaurant and the father and his business. Now we're sitting here and it's a Dorian bar and we've got a female victim who was in here at some point. Is it connected to him? Or he can see where this is going and he's trying to distance himself from the circumstances.
As detectives weigh their next move with Dorian, there is an unexpected development in the case.
You get a phone call, get to headquarters right about the guy's turned himself in.
Daniel Dorian wants to come in and give us a statement. But he wants to do it at police headquarters. He doesn't want to come to East New York. It's very different.
Detectives question Daniel Dorian again about the night Imette disappeared after closing time at the Falls bar.
Now he says, all right, listen, this is what happened. She was there. So he tells us that he sees Imette. She's very drunk. She's at the end of the bar, and she's arguing with him, that's their job, escort people out of the bar. And that's what they did.
At 4 a.m., the main entrance to the bar is already locked. So the two bouncers, Tim Catella and Daryl Littlejohn, escort Emmett out a secondary side door exit at 4:10 a.m., where there are no security cameras.
Ultimately, Dorian, when he did come around, said, listen, that girl walked out of here under her own power, aided by my two bouncers, Tim and Daryl.
But detectives put him on the back burner while they questioned the two bouncers.
Danny Dorian didn't do any research on any of the people that were doing security for his operation. He had no idea who was working for him.
The police department's investigation revealed the lack of attention and concern and care that the manager of that bar exercised in hiring his bouncers. How did you get your bouncers? Oh, this one recommended this one, and you know, he knows a friend, and I paid him $100 off the books at the end of the night. And
going into the backgrounds, Daryl was on parole for sure, and Tim was on probation. You have a curfew in general, but then you definitely can't work in a bar on parole. Now we know for sure you two were the last persons to see this girl outside this establishment.
Two doormen. Neither of them had any business working at the bar, interacting with vulnerable people under the influence of alcohol. At this point, the decision is, who do you zero in on?
At the Falls Bar, Tim Catella and Daryl Littlejohn. They both escorted Emmett St. Gian out of the bar at 4:10 a.m., 14 hours before her body was found in South Brooklyn.
So now we're going to circle back and ask them what happened. How did you get home that night?
Detectives start with Tim and ask him to come to the 75th precinct to answer some questions.
Tim lived in Staten Island. Daryl lived in Queens, complete opposite directions. So Daryl would go north in Manhattan towards either the bridge or the tunnel. And said, I went to the ferry and I saw Daryl talking with Emmett.
But he says he has no clue to what happened to either Littlejohn or Emmett after he walked in that direction.
Detectives need more than Tim's word to corroborate his story, but they're putting him on ice until they talk to the second bouncer, Daryl Littlejohn.
Daryl Littlejohn's an ex-con. He was on parole at the time, and his employment at Dorian's bar was a violation of his parole agreement.
With Daryl Littlejohn directly in their crosshairs, detectives use his...
Start with a basic timeline, just like we have in the case. Tell me your daily schedule. Tell me your routine. How do you get to work? How do you leave work? What are your hours? How long have you been working there? Do you remember this girl? He said he'd argued with her about racism and crime with black men. Daryl said he was a U.S. Marshal, which we know he wasn't. And they were just arguing about crime, how the statistics for black men are off than they should be. It was just a basic argument at a bar. He says he walked her out the door and she was on her way.
Littlejohn denies having anything to do with Emmett's murder, but detectives press him for details about what he was doing between 4:15 a.m., when Tim walked away from him and Emmett, and 8:26 p.m., when her body was found in South Brooklyn.
He's on parole, and he's also very cautious, and he knows that we're looking at him.
I mean, we talked to him for 2 days, over 8 hours and 8 hours. He never said, I don't want to talk to you. He'd say, I borrowed my ex-girlfriend's car and I was with her. I went to see my mom, and then I asked him, I said, maybe he went home with Emmett, maybe they had sex and she had a heart attack and died. Is that possible? But he was a career criminal. He wasn't talking.
Detectives are being stonewalled by Daryl Littlejohn, but they've obtained warrants for a sample of his DNA and are now able to search his house and vehicle.
This was front page news. And so when the police department executed a search warrant on Daryl Littlejohn's home in Queens, the camera crews from the local TV stations were in front of the home.
We find empty bottles of bleach in the garbage. And if he cleaned up the house with bleach, he was going to destroy DNA evidence. So the crime scene investigators took apart the drain and the sink, looking for hair fibers or blood. It was spotless. It was devastating.
Adding to detectives' frustration is the pressure from the ongoing media coverage and the public's desire to see Emmett St. Ian's killer brought to justice.
She was a sable-eyed. She had a very strong will, and she went her own way. It was a reminder that things can happen and the city's a dangerous place.
You go out with friends, you're in a bar, you're having drinks, you're having a good time, you're having a celebration. Your friends go home, you decide not to go home with them, and then you're never seen again. It's shocking, and it hits home, because so many people will sit there and say, I've done that. And that's...
When a case has sort of captivated the attention of a city, especially a large city like New York City, there can be an immense amount of pressure for investigators to solve the case quickly, especially if there is a concern within the community that there could be a killer in their midst and that they might be next. By getting the message out, the public might be able to report suspicious activity that they saw when they were leaving a bar late at night.
The persistent media coverage eventually unearths a significant lead for detectives.
A young woman, and she had been a victim of an unsolved crime just a short time earlier, back in November of 2005, and she saw in the background with the Klieg lights of the camera, she saw Daryl Littlejohn's van, and she said, that's the van that I was abducted in. She had been on her way home from college classes when she was abducted by a man who seemed to be some sort of law enforcement and was suggesting that he was going to arrest her, and he handcuffed her and threw her in the back of a van. But it gradually occurred to her that this was not somebody. And rolled around a corner, she opened the door and jumped out. And she escaped and survived. So what happens is the police take Littlejohn and put him in a lineup, but she can't make an identification of him. But the significance of this young woman's abduction was that there was a pattern to Daryl Littlejohn's conduct that was so similar to Emmett's case. He engaged young, attractive women and pretended to be in law enforcement and then abducted them. And Daryl Littlejohn emerged as a real suspect.
With a pattern of behavior and the means, detectives are certain that Daryl Littlejohn is the only person who had the opportunity to kill Emmett.
I think, unfortunately, with people who are sexually sadistic, there may be people who require more aggression, more pain, or more suffering to be inflicted for them to achieve the same level or a higher level of sexual arousal, almost like a high. We would call these people increasers. So for him, there's an increased likelihood because he's aroused by power, control, and domination and hurt, increases the likelihood that homicide would be the result of any of the sexual attacks that he may perpetrate.
With the clock ticking, detectives interview a new witness, a security guard who works nights in the area where Emmet's body was dropped.
He remembers walking along Fountain Avenue and seeing a minivan, and a guy is inside the van on the phone because the phone's lit up. He didn't give us a plate. He didn't say for sure that was Daryl, but it's the same type of...
As a night watchman. His shift was supposed to be from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 12-hour shifts, but he wasn't always on time. The police department got his Metro card, and they were able to trace exactly when he boarded the first train or bus in the Bronx and took the train to Brooklyn and then got on a bus in Brooklyn to go to his job.
So he's supposed to be at work at 7. It's late. Now it's 7:30 as he's walking down this route on Fountain Avenue. Timing is unbelievable. He was at the right place at the right time.
The evidence was overwhelming that this was Daryl's van, and of course, Daryl Littlejohn was not just the person who dumped the body, but he was also the killer.
Detectives are closing in on the prime suspect in Emmet St. Guillen's murder, Daryl Littlejohn. But their evidence in the case is entirely circumstantial.
Particularly if you wind up with a circumstantial case with no confession, with no eyewitnesses, the timeline becomes all that more important because your circumstantial evidence that you collect and gather either fits or it doesn't fit, and leading up to the murder and then in the investigation after the murder.
Detectives have an eyewitness account of a van matching Daryl Littlejohn's in the precise area where Emmet's body was dumped. And one detail stands out. The driver was using their cell phone.
Within a very short time, we had gotten a warrant for Daryl Littlejohn's phone records and cell tower records indicating the location of the towers that handled calls that he received at a certain time. And it turned out to be highly significant because eventually we were able to determine that there was a woman who was calling Littlejohn back. And so there were these 2 phone calls that were made at crucial times, hitting off specific towers in Queens and in Brooklyn. It put him driving from Queens to the general location where the body was found and back again, right at around the time that the night watchman puts this vehicle there.
Detectives have now placed bouncer Daryl Littlejohn exactly where Emmet's body was dumped, less than an hour before police were called to the scene at 8:26 p.m.
Time. They put him doing something, not just in general, but at a relevant time.
But without physical evidence or a confession, they can't link Littlejohn directly to the murder.
We see in Emmet's case that they get really to sort of the 7th inning stretch in this case. They have nearly all the circumstantial evidence they need, but there's just that one missing ingredient to allow them to make the final push to the knife. And a lot of investigators may have rolled the dice and gone to trial with what they already had, but we see them hold out and stay focused, looking for that difference between making an arrest and someone being acquitted at trial and making an arrest and making sure that person never gets out.
But then, detectives get the break they've been hoping for.
Ken's calling me. The only thing he can say is, "We got DNA." I said, "What?" "We got..." It was an interesting case. Ken calls up and he says, "We got DNA."
Forensics have come back on the snow brush found near Emmet.
We had left it behind, and had they done so, we would have been without a piece of evidence. But I'm grateful that it was whatever number of feet away from the body, and a detective chose to pick it up. I don't know, something about it made him say, "I'm going to take this," and that turned out to be very fortunate.
Little John's DNA also matches a speck of blood found on one of the zip ties used to bind her hands and feet.
So at least now we can say for sure, this is him. His DNA is not supposed to be there. I mean, I wasn't physically jumping up and down.
Of this circumstantial evidence to the fact that his DNA is there, how could his DNA be there if he wasn't responsible for the killing? We were so involved in this case, and it was just, you know, when we finally got the piece of evidence, it was just, it was overwhelming.
Detectives can now piece together Emmett St. Ian's final 24 hours.
So we know that Claire and Emmett leave the Pioneer Bar. Claire gets in the cab, she goes home. Emmett goes to the Falls Bar. She orders her 2 drinks at the Falls Bar, probably around 3:45.
She got into a conversation with Daryl Littlejohn in which she was talking about the criminal justice system and the incarceration rate of black people. I believe he was offended by what she said and decided that this is the woman he was going to prey on.
I think either he offered her a ride or he followed her walking and then forcibly
his residence.
From that point on is when obviously something happened between Daryl and Emmett.
She was beaten up and raped pretty badly.
There was evidence that she struggled with him and he strangled her.
Detectives now estimate that Emmett was murdered between 5:15 and 7:15 a.m., based on the final autopsy results.
Now he's got to get rid of the body. So why did he choose that place? Maybe he had driven past it dozens of times, and...
As Daryl Littlejohn drags Emmett's body out of the van, his snow brush falls out onto the ground.
One thing that I'm grateful that crime scene had the foresight to pick up was a little cheap brush, because ultimately it turned out to be important.
But one question remains unanswered. What was Daryl Littlejohn's motive?
This was, in fact, the work of a random stranger and a random attack. And there's absolutely no question in my mind that this could have been the beginning of Littlejohn's career as a serial killer, and that were it not far more victims.
Daryl Littlejohn is convicted for the murder of Emmett St. Ian on June 3rd, 2009. He is sentenced to life without parole.
Timeline was critical on this case. That's how you develop your story. You got a start and you got an end, and you got to try to piece it in the middle, and that's how you build your case and bring the person to justice who's responsible for that. There's nothing more satisfying than doing something like that.
You had DNA evidence, you had hair and video downloads. Every tool as an investigator we utilized. It's never going to bring back their relative or their loved one, but you do the best you can for them to give them closure.
I've talked to Emmett's mom, and whatever success we had in the courtroom doesn't change things for her. She doesn't have her Emmett back. She doesn't get to see her have children or get married or have a successful career. But years later, they created a scholarship in her honor at John Jay. I would like to think that those who say, this is someone who could have been me. That's why I need to do my job well and take it seriously, because the stakes are that high.